This attack has the object of disturbing the present united front of the Entente opposite Crown Prince Ruprecht's army group, and thereby creating the possibility of a victorious continuation of the offensive against the British. General der Infanterie und Ersten Generalquartiermeister Erich Ludendorff, May 1st, 1918. Hey folks, welcome to the Battles of the First World War podcast. 2nd Marne, Blücher-Yorck. Admin news up first. Folks, spots remain available for the 2026 Lost Battalion Tours Summer Pilgrimage to the old Meuse-Argonne battlefield. And here are a few details. The trip is from July 2nd through July 8th, 2026. We give you a time frame to arrive at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, CDG, and we will pick you up. As always, we do not book the flight for you, as these days many people can get fantastic deals all by themselves. These are deals we often couldn't meet. We give you the date to be in Paris, and once we pick you up, everything is up to us. We will shepherd you around, provide lodging and meals, and take you places that will leave you fully satisfied with your experience. This next visit will be one where we really plan to put boots on the ground. We will be walking in the paths of some individual doughboys in 2026. This is a new-ish feature of Lost Battalion Tours, and we're excited to share it with you. If you're ex-military and know about staff rides, the 2026 pilgrimage will be like a light staff walk, if that makes any sense. Here are a couple of stops on our itinerary. July 4th, with their bare hands, Malancourt to Montfaucon. We will walk in the footsteps of U.S. Army Major Harry Dravo Parkin, commander of 1st Battalion, 316th Infantry Regiment, 79th Division. This will take us on a journey that encompasses the 79th Division's first combat tour in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. As it will be the 4th of July, we think it appropriate to visit the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery that afternoon. We will have a guided visit and take part in the retreat ceremony at 16:30. July 6th. Give me Chatillon, MacArthur. Give me Chatillon, or a list of 5,000 casualties. We will visit the site where the 42nd Rainbow Division broke the vaunted Kriemhilde Stellung, the German trench position that had been so hard to crack up until then. Following in the footsteps of Medal of Honor recipient Private Thomas Neibauer, we will visit the La Tuilerie farm site, Moussard Farm, and crawl the slopes of the Côte de Châtillon. Men, I'm going across that river, and I expect you to go with me. That afternoon, we will see sights of the Meuse-Argonne breakout in November 1918, where the U.S. 2nd Division smashed through German lines and began a race to the River Meuse. La Sartelle Farm, Villa-Montry Overlook, East Bank at the crossing site, and the Varmont-Bellefontaine Farms. In this part of the pilgrimage, we will be in the footsteps of United States Marine Corps Corporal Elton Mackin, who wrote vividly of his experiences in his memoir, Suddenly, We Didn't Want to Die. Other pilgrimage stops will include American Medal of Honor sites, local independent museums, and hopefully a local brewery. We are also usually able to include special requests in case there is something important to you that you would like to see. You get all of this for just $3,700 per guest. Again, this price does not include airfare, which you must provide yourself. All we require for you to reserve a spot on this fabulous trip is a non-refundable $370 deposit. After that, we can work up payment plans with you. Yes, we do offer easy payment plans. Just talk to us. Christmas is here, folks. Send an email to lostbattaliontours@gmail.com and we will get all of the details over to you. Second bit of admin news, Patreon. Want these episodes a month early and ad-free? Sign up on Patreon. Links are in the show notes. The writing for this episode inspired some exclusive Patreon content that will be available in the coming weeks. So Patreon patrons, be on the lookout for that. Final admin note of the episode is on the city of Reims. R-E-I-M-S. Reims. There is an M like Mike in the word, but you say more of an N like November in the pronunciation. Seriously, it's a trip to pronounce, and it's not to be confused with Rennes, which is in Brittany and spelled R-E-N-N-E-S. So, you might see Rennes as Reims or Rhymes, but as we are in France, we will say it as the French say. Best of luck to you trying to pronounce it as well. Okay, let's get back to the front. Last episode, we left off with the question of who would be proven right about establishing defense in-depth positions in the Chemin des Dames sector of the Western Front in spring 1918. Would it be French Army Commander General Philippe Pétain, who advocated for such a defensive scheme, or French 6th Army Commander General Denis-Auguste Duchesne, who believed his sector unsuited for a defensive setup that he didn't believe in anyway? Well, here, I'll just answer it now. Pétain was right. Duchesne was wrong. On 17 April 1918, German Army Commander General Erich Ludendorff issued a warning order to Army Group Crown Prince. For listeners who may not be used to the military speak, a warning order is an order issued from a higher command to a lower command, preparing them for an upcoming mission. If you have kids, you've issued warning orders to them. It sounds like this. Hey kids, start getting ready. We leave for Grandma's in an hour. Like that. German Army Group Crown Prince, commanded by Crown Prince Wilhelm, began preparing for an offensive against the Chemin des Dames. Why attack the French here? Well, the reason was that Ludendorff wanted to split off the British from the French. By attacking the French here, in the Chemin des Dames, a weak section of the line, French reserves positioned up north would be alerted and redeployed to stem the German assault. The loss of French reserves up north would leave the British sector more vulnerable to attack. Ludendorff planned to do precisely that by unleashing Crown Prince Ruprecht's army group up north once the French had rushed down their reserves to plug the hole he planned to blast in the line down here. The German attacks in March and April 1918 had been tactically brilliant, but strategically disappointing. This time, he would make German victory happen, and Unternehmen Blücher would be the name for it. York would be added on for later German attacks around the area of Noyon, and the name Goetz would denote the attacks against Rennes, but we'll stick with Blücher-Yorck for simplicity. Strict controls were placed in both the operation orders and preparations for it. First, Ludendorff set limited objectives so that he could keep his eye on the strategic prize, splitting the Franco-British forces up north. For preparations, the Germans brought men and materiel into the battle area with the practiced level of attention to detail they've been known for a long time. troop formations deploying into the area only marched at night. Frontline German units holding the line were informed that the new units coming into their sector were exhausted divisions resting and rebuilding themselves. On the front, soldiers conducting reconnaissance missions removed the rank and unit identifiers from their uniforms in case they were captured. Artillery was moved into the area, and the guns and howitzers were prepared without the telltale ranging shots that would give them away. The more than 3,700 guns brought in were laid on their targets using math, and that was it. In Crown Prince Wilhelm's army group, 41 infantry divisions between the German 7th and 1st Armies would carry out the attack. The 7th Army would lead the main attack on the Chemin des Dames sector, and under its command there were 6 Army Corps. Of these 6 Army Corps, the 25th Reserve Corps under General Arnold von Winkler and 4th Reserve Corps under General Richard von Conta would be the spearheads, with Gruppe Winkler in particular described as the Ram of the 7th Army in the German Reichsarchiv Schlachten des Weltkriegs series, book number 32, Deutsche Siege 1918. Gruppe Winkler and Gruppe Conta were located in the center and center-left of 7th Army's front, from roughly north of Craon village in the east to Malval Farm in the west. The 25th Reserve and 4th Reserve Corps faced roughly 1 or 2 Allied infantry divisions, so the odds were definitely in the attackers' favor in these sectors. Facing this growing host of German arms was General Duchesne's French 6th Army, which held a 55-mile front from Noyon in the west to a point a few miles north of Rennes in the east. From left to right, the French 30th Corps, French 11th Corps, the British 9th Corps, and the French 1st Colonial Corps held the front with 3 divisions up front each. General Duchesne had 17 divisions under his command, and as we discussed in the last episode, the majority of the infantry were manning the front-line trenches. This went against the doctrine of defense in depth, which held that the front line should be thinly held and easily given up in order to draw the enemy into the battle zone behind the line. With men packing the front lines, those forward positions were potential windfalls should the Germans attack with artillery, which you know they are going to do. Now, if you heard in the French 6th Army's subordinate formations that I said the British 9th Corps, yes, you heard correctly. Under the command of Lieutenant General Sir Alexander Hamilton Gordon, the 9th Corps had seen heavy and bloody combat in the German March and April offensives, and had been rotated down to the Chemin des Dames as part of Marshal Ferdinand Foch's Roulement plan to create a general reserve. The depleted divisions of the British 9th Corps would relieve fresh French divisions, and in the quiet sector of the Chemin des Dames, they could rebuild themselves. The 50th, 8th, and 21st Divisions took over the French front line from just northwest of the ruins of Craon on the California Plateau, running east to a point between Berry-au-Bac and Le Havre villages. Like the French divisions in the 6th Army sector, the British divisions each held wide sectors stretching over 7 kilometers wide. The British noted right away that the Chemin des Dames sector was a poor one and not well suited for defense. The first line, support, and reserve trenches were all packed into the narrow ridge, and a couple of thousand meters behind that lay the battle zone, where the main fight against a hypothetical attack was to take place. Beyond the battle zone was a position known to the Tommies as the Green Line, which was a series of mutually supportive machine gun nests held together with some barbed wire and a lot of hope. British concerns about the sector's defense capability were noted and mostly ignored. As the May days marched steadily towards the end of the month, the Tommies of the BEF 9th Corps saw, heard and felt the signs of an impending attack in front of them. They weren't the only ones. The Germans were extremely proficient at operational security, but despite their best efforts, the buildup of men and materiel was noticed. American intelligence reported to the French that there was a good chance that the Germans were planning something around the Chemin des Dames. But, as American Expeditionary Force Commander General John Blackjack Pershing was proving to be obstinate about amalgamating American troops with French units, the American intel assessment went unheard. Indisputable evidence came on May 26, 1918. During a firefight between French and German forces at the River Ayette, a German senior Feldwebel of a Saxon Jaeger unit and a soldat of either a reserve or ersatz regiment, both from the 197th Infantry Division, were captured. After being pressed by French intelligence, both men stated that an attack was coming and that it was scheduled to begin the very next day, and they provided details. Years later, the authors of the German Reichsarchiv book series Schlachten des Weltkriegs would write about this, saying, quote, "There is simply no defense against treason," end quote. Now, the French had no excuse, and 6th Army Commander General Duchesne finally began to act. Troops were ordered to man the front line, reserves were moved up, and all went on alert at 1900 on the evening of the 26th. Duchesne also ordered French artillery to open up on known German assembly areas and crossroads so as to begin disrupting and killing German troops. Hans Schiller, an artilleryman in Hinterpommersche Feldartillerieregiment Nummer 53, or Pomeranian Field Artillery Regiment 53, was on the receiving end of that French artillery fire. In his memoir, titled A Tale of Two Fronts, compiled by his granddaughter Karen Wagner, and to be discussed in a future podcast, Schiller recounted, quote, "In the next few hours, it roared and pelted all around us, as if the gates of hell had opened. We were so dazed that we couldn't even gather our thoughts. We could only lay there without any willpower to move exactly where we had thrown ourselves. Just don't stand up," went through our heads, because that would mean certain death, end quote. Schiller later made it closer to the front line, where he reported, "The regiment's aide-de-camp approached us, looked around for a second, and then said to our lieutenant, 'We wanted to exterminate the Frenchman, and now he's exterminating us. An assault is not even possible in these circumstances. This is due to nothing but pure treason in this game.'" The aide-de-camp and Schiller afterwards both referred to the two Germans taken prisoner mentioned earlier. Contrary to the aide-de-camp, an assault would be possible. At 0100 on the morning of May 27, 1918, over 3,700 guns, using the tactics of Colonel Georg Bruchmüller, opened up on a front of 43 kilometers. A sea of flames as wide as the eye could see, thousands of flashes over us, and then over there, loud crashes and shattering, Hans Schiller wrote in his memoir. "We were blinded by the firestorm, and we were pressed to the ground by the air pressure of the shells." From Chavignon in the west to Berry-au-Bac in the east, every known French and British position was under crushing artillery fire. The bombardment was wide, but it went deep as well. Allied positions as far back as 12 kilometers behind the front were being soaked. The German artillery program was something to be in awe of. The flanks of the attack zone were hit with mustard gas to confuse Allied forces as to where the attack would be. Some 80% of the shells hitting French artillery positions were gas shells, causing devastating losses amongst the gunners. On the front line, a heavy mix of high explosive and gas shells forced the troops to both mask up and desperately seek shelter. From 0110 to 0215, trench mortars plastered the front lines of the Chemin des Dames, which were packed with French and British troops. The field guns and medium guns focused on smashing the Allied artillery, and long-range guns hit transportation and communications points far behind the lines. At 0215, some of the medium guns switched to helping work over the French and British front lines, using a Feuerwalze creeping barrage to rip the Chemin des Dames ridge from north to south. At the same time, the long-range guns lifted their range to begin hitting Allied positions as far south as the River Velle. The French 6th Army front rocked under the churning firestorm, with the densely packed frontline infantry units taking horrific casualties. At 0335, all German guns and trench mortars reoriented to the front line, which they pummeled once again for 5 minutes. A French gendarme in the 47th Division reported from behind the front on the confusion and chaos wrought by the firestorm. Quote, Monday, 27th May. At 0120 hours, shell fire wakes us up. They are very close. I get up. Shells are falling all around and seem to be getting closer. One falls in a garden next to our billet. We don't feel very safe. At 3 o'clock, we smell gas. We receive the order to go around and warn the people to have their masks ready. Around 6 o'clock, the bombardment seems to slacken off. It starts again, but even more than before. We don't know what's going on. At 11, a captain comes, but he too knows nothing, seems to think that the attack has failed. It's raining shells, and groups of planes pass overhead. Around 1 o'clock, the first evacuees arrive. Rumors abound, but there is no concrete news. Some say that they, the Germans, have crossed the Aisne and that Rancy has fallen. Boche airplanes come over and machine gun the roads. We still don't know what's happening. Delville goes to Corps HQ at 2 p.m. and comes back an hour later without orders. No one knows what to do, and we wait for orders to leave. A group of artillerymen arrive saying that all their guns are lost. We realize that things are bad. At 1600 hours, we tell people to leave, although they can stay if they want to. 2/3 leave, but the others prefer to stay. The Montigny to Jonchery road is swept by shell fire. The road is choked with refugees, pushing hand carts, horse-drawn carts, and so on. What a sad spectacle. There are at least 30 people in the barn where we sleep. The village is full. End quote. At 0340, the guns lifted, and 29 German divisions, assisted by captured tanks and some 500 airplanes, launched their assault. In the previous 2 hours and 40 minutes, 3 million shells had been fired into the French 6th Army's sector. The front line on the Chemin des Dames had been obliterated, and many of the poilus and Tommies manning it had been too. There was only scattered resistance by a few stunned survivors as German stormtroops quickly shot past the shattered front line trenches. By 0530, the right half of the ridge, the California Plateau, had fallen to the Germans. In the British 9th Corps sector on the California Plateau, the 8th Division's official history recorded that, quote, the first infantry attack, assisted by tanks which flattened out the wire, was delivered. It is probable, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, against the angle of the salient in our right subsector, 25th Infantry Brigade. Owing to the dense mist and to the fact that nearly all units in the outpost zone were cut off to a man, it is difficult to reconstruct precisely the sequence of events. It is only at intervals that a clear message comes back out of the chaos and confusion which the fog necessarily produced. Even such a message only serves to emphasize the assistance which the lack of visibility and the exposed position of our troops in the salient gave to the enemy in his attack. Take, for instance, the following pigeon message. The following pigeon timed at 5:15 a.m., which was received at divisional headquarters at 6:05 a.m. Headquarters, 2nd Royal Berkshires Regiment, consisting of Lieutenant Colonel Griffin, Captain Clare, Regimental Sergeant Major Wilkins, Sergeant Trinder, Corporal Dobson, Privates Stone, Gregory, Slee, and Quartermaster surrounded. Germans threw bombs down dugouts and pressed on. They appeared to approach from right rear in considerable strength. No idea what has happened elsewhere. Holding out in hopes of relief. Relief did not come. By 0530, the Germans had torn a hole in the Allied line. To the left of the British Ninth Corps, the French 11th Corps' 21st and 22nd Divisions took on the full force of the German 7th Army's battering ram, the aforementioned Gruppe Winkler. The Germans cut right through the 11th Corps, which began to fall apart under the weight of the barrage and the overwhelming attack. In the 21st Division sector, surviving groups of the 137e Régiment d'Infanterie Poilus put up what resistance they could. A Lieutenant Louis Jean-Antoine Joseph-Marie Deligny fought against the Germans who surrounded him with his soldiers until they were all killed. Deligny's personnel file listed him initially as disparu, or disappeared. His remains would not be recovered until 1920, when he was finally listed as tué à l'ennemi, killed by the enemy, which is the French equivalent of killed in action. In the Bois d'Erly, right on the front line, a small group of 1st Battalion Poilus fought on into the afternoon, by which time German units were already crossing the Velle, way down south. By the end of the day, the regiment was down to its colonel, 6 officers, and 200 men, having lost 49 officers and 1,750 soldiers. If you remember, the 137e, the 137th Infantry Regiment, this is the regiment whose poilus forever man the trench of bayonets in Verdun. The German attack coursed through the French Sixth Army's destroyed front line. By 0900, German Frontkämpfer were at the River Aisne, where many of the bridges had not been blown in time to impede their advance. The British, more adapted to these fights now that they had faced 2 previous assaults, blew the bridges in their sector. It was still a desperate fight. From the BEF 8th Division's official history, quote, "The attack swept forward, and although our troops resisted stubbornly for a time in the battle zone and caused severe losses to the enemy on this line, the defense was overwhelmed by weight of numbers. Brigade HQ had been early involved in the fighting, being practically surrounded before it was known that the front line had gone. It was near here that the brigade major, Captain B.C. Pascoe, Military Cross Rifle Brigade, was killed while making a gallant stand. General Hussey and what remained of his headquarters staff fought their way out and moved back to Gennecourt to organize its defenses. At 6:30 a.m., General Hussey reported to Divisional HQ that he was holding the river line there with the remnants of his brigade. At 7:15 a.m., he further reported that all the bridges east of the junction of the Miette and Aisne had been blown up and that he was holding the high ground west of Gennecourt. Later in the morning, General Hussey, who had only taken command of the brigade front on the 7th of May, was badly wounded and gassed, and he died a few days after in German hands." End quote. Overall, while overwhelmed and being steadily destroyed, the British Ninth Corps put up as much fight as it could. Around 1100 German troops crossed the River Aisne in force. French 6th Army Commander General Duchesne now realized he and his command were in a whole heap of trouble. This probably would have been the very worst, but also the very best time to ask him for his thoughts on defense in depth now. He called in reserves to try to staunch the hemorrhage he was in. The Germans, however, were not to be stopped on that 27th of May. By 1400 that afternoon, the hole in the French 6th Army's front was 40 kilometers wide and nearly 20 kilometers deep. Coal scuttle helmets and Feldgrau could already be seen on the ridge over the river Velle. The next day, the 28th, the French Sixth Army found itself in crisis. Many of the machine guns and field guns had been lost in the initial German attack, hampering a strong defense. Fiume, far down from the Chemin des Dames by the Velle, fell to the Germans at 0730 that morning. General Philippe Pétain, commanding the French army, called for a new defense line to be held along the Velle. That order was moot almost as soon as it was issued, on account of the above news of Fiume having been seized by the enemy. Pétain then called for attacks on the flanks, as per his directive number 4. This wasn't possible, as General Duchesne's flanks were buckling under pressure at that very moment. General Duchesne threw in his reserves as they hurriedly appeared on the battlefield, and so they were fed into the battle piecemeal, where they had little effect. Pétain called for a Paris line to be held northwest of the city of Soissons, and he ordered some reserves to begin moving towards the steadily forming German bulge in the sector. Pétain also asked Allied Supreme Commander Marshal Foch for more reserve formations, but Foch didn't want to provide them. He believed this latest German offensive to be a feint. The real attack was to come elsewhere, and he would be ready for it. On the evening of the 28th, the Germans took Soissons. The German attack on the Chemin des Dames had proven to be much more successful than General Erich Ludendorff had originally thought. For him to keep his eyes on the real prize, splitting the French and British forces up north, he would have to rein himself in and keep to the limited objectives he had set for this offensive. But in a fantastic sentence, historian Richard Holmes summed up Ludendorff's weakness. Quote, "For the third time in 3 months, the German commander tasted the heady wine of tactical victory, and characteristically allowed it to blur his strategic insight." End quote. I mean, damn, that's a good sentence, and it really explains things. Seeing the success his forces were experiencing, Ludendorff ordered the Blücher-Yorck offensive to continue. He believed the road to Paris had been blasted open here, and he had to push now. On the 29th, German forces crossed the river Ourcq and pushed Pétain's Paris line back. Fère-en-Tardenois, 40 kilometers south of the Chemin des Dames front, fell to the Germans that day. On May 30th, units of the German 4th Reserve Corps under General Conta reached the river Marne. This was heady stuff. The Germans hadn't set foot near this river since 1914. Now they were here again. It really did appear that the road to Paris was open to the German army. But there is good and bad to everything in life. The deeper the Germans penetrated into the French sector south of the Chemin des Dames, the more they stretched their already taut supply lines. The French, being pushed back, found themselves closer to vital supply points that helped keep the fight going. As the Germans continued trying to push deeper south, French divisions on the flanks of the salient began to stabilize. Fresh French units began to move into the battle area. The British 9th Corps, largely destroyed and reduced to a force of 4 composite battalions, handed over their section of the line to the incoming French 5th Corps. By the 31st of May, the offensive began to seriously slow down. Heavy fighting broke out at Château-Thierry, at the very southern tip of the new salient, as fresh American doughboys from the AEF's 3rd Division helped hold the line with their French allies there. General Pétain had 10 French army divisions moving towards the front by this time. When BEF Field Marshal Douglas Haig refused to provide reinforcements, Marshal Foch turned to American General Pershing. Pershing, sensing the danger of the moment, released the mammoth 2nd and 3rd Divisions to help the beleaguered French. German troops were losing the initiative. They had been fighting brutally hard since the 27th of May, and by the 31st they must have been utterly exhausted. Discipline issues were popping up as poorly fed German troops found well-stocked Allied food caches and untouched civilian cellars. Drunkenness was a not uncommon result, and this was, of course, a serious issue for the German army. Ludendorff ordered on June 1st the German First Army to attack the city of Reims, which was another vital communications and rail hub. On the opposite side of the wire, commander of the Groupe d'Armée du Nord, General Franchet d'Esperey, aka Desperate Frankie to the British, ordered Reims to be evacuated. His subordinates ignored his order and fought the German attacks to a standstill with the help of the guns at Fort de la Pompelle. It was here that the tide of the Blücher-Yorck offensive turned. Reims held, and the German 7th and 1st Armies were out of gas. Ludendorff put the pending Unternehmen Hagen, the follow-up attack up north, on hold. By 2nd June, most of the fighting in and around the edges of the new German salient died out. The next day, the German bridgehead on the Marne was destroyed by American and French forces. New German attacks launched on the 4th gained little, and on June 6th, Crown Prince Wilhelm ordered the forces in the salient into a defensive posture. It so happened that on that same day, the U.S. Marines of the AEF's 2nd Division attacked a little-known patch of forest named Bois de Belleau. With the French 10th and 5th Armies holding the lines around the new German salient, it was time for the French army to clean house. 6th Army Commander General Auguste Duchesne was relieved of his command, as were a couple of his subordinate commanders. Duchesne was clearly responsible for a large part of the disaster that had just occurred. He had refused to implement Pétain's directive on defense in depth, and his army had been annihilated in its frontline trenches with the opening German bombardment. However, as Dr. Elizabeth Greenhalgh wrote in her book, The French Army in the First World War, Duchesne wasn't alone. His next-line commander, General Franchet d'Esperey, hadn't insisted that the Chemin des Dames be set up for defense in depth. And above Desperate Frankie, Pétain had let the matter slide as well. By June 5th, the day before the Germans were ordered to dig in and hold their new positions, the French army had lost nearly 100,000 men since May 27th. They had barely held the line since the day of the attack. The Germans had won another stunning tactical victory, destroying French and British forces, and taking another huge chunk of French territory. The victory had not been a strategic one, however. The Allied armies still stood, loosely working together. Even worse, now the Americans were coming in force, and they were looking for a fight. From northeast of Soissons, at a village named Nouveau, to Reims in the east, and ending at its furthest point south at Château-Thierry, the Germans now sat in a hard-to-supply salient. They were also now surrounded on 3 sides by enemies who were surely bent on revenge. Oh, and they were. It would be an unlikely French officer who, with his cunning instincts of a killer, would sense an opportunity to strike back at the Germans. This German salient would be the next battlefield, and that opportunity to strike back would become known as the Second Battle of the Marne. Questions, comments, or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact me at verdunpodcast@gmail.com. Get at me on Blue Sky at ww1podcast.bsky.social, and check out the BFWWP website, firstworldwarpodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you again soon. Take care.